The highway stretched endlessly across the frozen plains of northern America, silent and almost lifeless under a heavy gray sky. Emily Carter gripped the steering wheel tightly as her car moved slowly through the snow-covered road. She was on her way to visit a friend in a nearby town, a drive she had done many times before. But that afternoon, the weather had changed without warning. What began as light snowfall quickly turned into a violent blizzard. The wind howled like a wild animal, shaking the car as thick snow slammed against the windshield. Emily turned on the radio, hoping for updates, but all she heard was static. Within minutes, visibility dropped to almost zero. The road signs disappeared beneath layers of ice, and the tire tracks ahead were erased as if they had never existed. Panic slowly crept into her chest. She tried to slow down, but it was already too late. The car skidded on black ice, spun sideways, and slid off the road into a shallow ditch. The engine stalled. Emily's heart pounded as she tried to restart it, but the car refused to respond. When she stepped outside, the cold hit her like a slap. The wind burned her face, and the snow swallowed her boots with every step. Her phone had no signal. The battery was already low. Emily returned to the car and wrapped her coat tightly around herself. She waited, hoping another vehicle might pass by, but the storm erased all sound and movement. Hours passed. The cold crept into her fingers and toes, numbing them painfully. She realized staying in the car might be just as dangerous as leaving it. With trembling hands, she packed what little she had, half a bottle of water, a scarf, and her faith. She whispered a quiet prayer, asking for strength, then stepped back into the storm. Each step forward felt like a battle. The wind pushed her back, snow stung her eyes, and her legs grew heavier with every passing minute. As daylight faded, fear grew stronger. She was lost, alone, and surrounded by endless white. Yet somewhere deep inside, Emily refused to give up. She believed that if she kept moving, if she kept hoping, she would survive. Unaware of it then, those first painful steps into the blizzard marked the beginning of a journey that would test her faith, her courage, and her will to live more than anything she had ever faced before. Night fell quickly, and with it came a deeper, more terrifying cold. The blizzard showed no mercy. Snow fell endlessly from the sky, driven sideways by violent winds that screamed across the open land. Emily struggled forward, her footprints disappearing behind her within seconds. Every direction looked the same, white, empty, and unforgiving. Her body began to weaken faster than she expected. Her fingers were stiff and numb, barely able to move. Each breath burned her lungs, and her legs trembled with exhaustion. Several times, she stumbled and fell into the snow, forcing herself to rise again through sheer determination. She knew that stopping for too long could mean falling asleep, and never waking up. Sometime during the night, Emily found brief shelter behind a cluster of frozen trees. She pressed her back against the trunk, blocking the worst of the wind. There, under the dark sky, she whispered prayers again and again, her voice shaking. She asked for guidance, for warmth, for a sign that she was not alone. The silence around her felt endless, but the act of praying kept her focused, kept fear from completely taking over. By morning, the storm had not weakened. Hunger clawed at her stomach, and thirst dried her lips. Her water was gone. She began to feel dizzy, her thoughts slowing, her steps becoming careless. At times, she imagined hearing voices or seeing shapes in the distance, tricks of a mind pushed to its limits. Still, she forced herself onward, believing that help had to exist somewhere beyond the wall of snow. As the second night approached, Emily's strength nearly failed her. Her vision blurred, and her body shook uncontrollably. That was when she saw it, a dark shape standing against the white horizon. At first, she thought it was another illusion, but as she moved closer, the shape became clearer. It was a wooden barn, old and weathered, but solid. Tears filled her eyes as she reached the door. Her hands were too weak to pull it open at first, but she gathered every last bit of strength and tried again. The door creaked, and she stumbled inside. The air was cold, but the wind was gone. It felt like safety. Emily collapsed onto the straw-covered floor, her body finally giving up. In the dim light, surrounded by silence, she knelt and prayed one last time. She did not pray for miracles, only for survival. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside the barn, Emily held on to hope, unaware that this place would soon become the answer to her prayers. Morning arrived quietly, though the storm had not fully passed. The wind outside the barn had softened, but snow still drifted across the land like a white fog. Inside the barn, Emily lay curled on the straw-covered floor, barely conscious. Her lips were pale, her hands swollen from the cold, and her body felt heavier than ever before. Every breath was slow and shallow. At sunrise, a rancher named John Miller began his routine. He had lived on the land his entire life and knew the dangers of winter storms. When the blizzard hit, he worried about his cattle and decided to check the far barn as soon as the weather allowed. Pulling on his heavy coat and boots, he stepped into the cold morning, unaware that his ordinary routine was about to change a life forever. As John reached the barn, something felt strange. The door was slightly open. He frowned, he always kept it closed during storms. Pushing it wider, he called out, expecting to see an animal that had broken loose. Instead, he froze. On the floor, near a pile of straw, was a young woman. She was kneeling weakly, her head bowed, her lips moving silently in prayer. For a moment, John could only stare, shocked by the sight. Then instinct took over. "Hey, can you hear me?" he asked urgently as he rushed to her side. Emily looked up slowly, her eyes unfocused. She tried to speak, but only a faint sound escaped her lips. John immediately wrapped his jacket around her and lifted her carefully. She felt dangerously cold. He knew she had been exposed for far too long. Without wasting time, John carried her to his truck and turned the heater on full blast. As they drove toward his house, he called emergency services, explaining that he had found a woman suffering from severe cold exposure. The operator told him help was on the way. At the house, John's wife brought blankets and warm water while they waited for paramedics. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness, but one thing was clear, she was alive. When the ambulance finally arrived, the medics worked quickly, praising John for acting fast. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that Emily had survived 2 days in extreme conditions. Another few hours in the cold could have been fatal. When she finally woke fully, she learned where she was and how she had been found. Tears rolled down her face, not from pain, but from relief and gratitude. For John, the experience stayed with him. He had faced many storms before, but this one reminded him how fragile life could be, and how powerful a simple act of kindness could be. What began as a routine morning had become a moment neither of them would ever forget. Emily remained in the hospital for several days as her body slowly recovered from the brutal cold. Doctors treated her for dehydration, frostbite, and exhaustion, but they all agreed on one thing: her survival was extraordinary. Many patients exposed to such extreme conditions for far less time did not make it. Emily listened quietly as they spoke, still trying to understand how close she had come to losing everything. When her strength returned, Emily asked to see John Miller. The moment he walked into her hospital room, she felt overwhelmed with emotion. Tears filled her eyes as she thanked him again and again. John smiled gently and told her that he had only done what anyone should do. But Emily knew the truth: if he had not gone to that barn that morning, she would not be alive. News of her survival spread quickly. Local reporters called it a miracle, a story of faith, endurance, and human kindness. Emily shared how, during the darkest moments in the barn, prayer had been the only thing keeping her mind steady. She believed that her faith had guided her steps to the barn and guided John to her door. As winter slowly loosened its grip on the land, Emily returned home, forever changed. She no longer rushed through life or took small moments for granted. The silence of the blizzard had taught her something powerful: that strength is not always loud, and hope can exist even when everything else feels lost. John also found himself changed. The experience reminded him that even in isolation, people are connected in ways they may never fully understand. He continued his ranch work as before, but every time he passed the barn, he paused for a moment of quiet reflection. Months later, Emily returned to the ranch. Standing beside the barn, she felt the weight of memory and gratitude. The snow was gone, replaced by open skies and calm winds. What had once been a place of fear had become a symbol of survival. Their story remained a reminder to everyone who heard it: in the coldest storms, hope can still survive. Sometimes, it arrives as a prayer whispered in the dark. Sometimes, it arrives as a door opening at exactly the right moment.